The Mill Owner's Daughter.
Chapter 11. Michael O'Donnell rose early on the Tuesday morning, careful not to wake his wife. He made his way downstairs. Grace was already bustling about in the kitchen when he put his head around the door. "Good morning, Michael. It's a lovely day," she greeted him, knowing the trade union organiser would be upset if she didn't treat him as an equal. "It is, Grace, and how are you today?" "Never better," she said with a grin. "Would you like some tea? What can I get you for breakfast? We have some lovely Malc kippers." "I've no doubt Mr. Etherall will enjoy the kippers, Grace, but as a plain working man—" "You'd like porridge," she interrupted with a smile. "How's that young man of yours, Grace?" "He's ever so lovely," she replied dreamily, "but he's finding it hard to make ends meet with this strike." Michael nodded. "It's hard, Grace, but we have to make a stand. We'll all be better off in the long run." "I know, but it's still hard." She broke off for a moment before adding, "Pity Meisters can't be all like Mr. Etherall. He's always treated folk decent." Michael remained silent, signalling assent. Placing the pot of tea, Grace passed him onto a tray and collecting the china. He made his way out of the kitchen and retraced his way upstairs, in thoughtful mood, to where his wife waited. Irene Rose lay on her side, one arm stretched out over the pillow, a long fair hair splayed out in a fan over the linen. Michael placed the tray down quietly on the small bedside table and looked down at her for a moment. They represented a curious combination in many ways, and an unlikely couple. She a mill owner's daughter, and he an Irish mill hand. Yet chance had brought them together, and together they were a formidable force. The feisty bourgeois Chartist and the patient, methodical proletarian trade unionist. And now she was going to be the mother of his child, another reason for them to fight together for a better future. Still fast asleep, her breathing regular and shallow, he sat down gingerly on the side of the bed and placed his hand on her exposed shoulder. "Wake up, Rose, me love. Drink your tea." She began to stir, her bright blue eyes opening then closing momentarily, temporarily unaccustomed to the bright light flooding into the room. Eventually she locked on to his dark blue eyes and smiled for a brief moment, before snaking her arms around his waist to bury her head against his side, hugging him tight. "What time is it, Michael?" "Time to be up and doing," he laughed, stroking her soft fair hair. At that moment he wanted to express his love to her, but felt his vocabulary was far too inadequate to explain the depths of his feelings. He didn't have to say anything. He never did. Irene Rose knew. She saw it in his eyes and felt it in his touch every moment they were together. The Trades Conference proceeded reasonably quietly that day, a resolution finally being carried, calling on workers employed in manufacturing industry throughout Britain to join the strike, whilst taking care to maintain essential supplies and to ensure their workplaces were kept in good order. An overwhelming majority adopted the demand for a fair day's work for a fair day's pay and a return to the wage levels of 1839, coupled with demands for the repeal of the 1834 New Poor Law, support for the 10-hour bill, universal education for children under the age of 14 at public expense, and the implementation of the Charter. 143 delegates attended the proceedings. They represented all aspects of the textile industry, plus building workers, metal workers, mill engine and locomotive engineers, iron and brass founders, textile machine manufacturers, and others. As expected, the main bone of contention was the resolution's expression of support for the Charter. 85 delegates took part in the debate on the main resolution. Of these, one delegate informed the meeting he hadn't been mandated by those who had elected him, and another 19 had been instructed to abide by the majority decision of the conference. 58 had been instructed to support the Charter. 7 spoke out against its inclusion, insisting the strike should be confined to defeating the wage cuts. In the event, the main resolution, moved by Joseph Mannery, the Manchester Building Workers delegate, and containing the link with the Charter, was carried by a large majority, 120 delegates voting in favour. Having determined their overall strategy and policy, the delegates then decided to elect an executive committee to carry on the leadership of the strike until such time as the employers capitulated. They decided to meet the next day in order to do so. At James Leach's request, the chairman asked those delegates who were delegates to the Chartist Convention starting the next day to remain behind for a meeting. 5 men attended: John Leach, representing the factory operatives of Hyde; Bernard McCartney, of the silk weavers of Lee; James Mooney, elected by a general meeting of trades in Colne; David Morrison, representative of the Mechanics' Society, Patricroft; and Thomas Pitt, elected by a public meeting of trades in Ashton-under-Lyne. All were obvious targets for arrest, and yet it was vital all attended the Chartist Convention. They supported the main resolution of the Trades Conference and would speak out for it. Furthermore, they each had the ability to convince the faint-hearted. James Leach informed them of the intelligence they had received from Janet, advised them not to travel to their homes that night, and explained safe houses had been arranged. 2 could join David Morrison at Matthew Edrose, and the rest could stay with Mary Upton and friends. Arrangements were being made to inform their families. This news was received with little apparent surprise. It was to be expected. They then went on to discuss tactics for the Chartist Convention and how to ensure it expressed its support for the general strike. Evidently, important forces within the National Chartist leadership were now beginning to distance themselves from the strike. Most of those present found this information more than a little shocking. The success or failure of the workers' struggle could very well be determined by the convention's final decision. Thus the fate of millions hung in the balance. That evening James Leach met Peter Murray McDowell and Jonathan Bairstow in the Griffin Tavern. Later they were joined by John Campbell and Thomas Cooper, the former being the National Charter Association National Secretary, and the latter a Chartist journalist and lecturer. Leach, McDowell and Campbell comprised the Executive Committee of the National Charter Association, along with Morgan Williams, George Binns, R.K. Philp, and Abel Heywood, the Treasurer, none of whom were present. Cooper had met Campbell when he boarded the train from London to Manchester at Crewe, having narrowly escaped arrest at Burslem. He informed them all hell had broken loose in the potteries, with troops shooting at unarmed people, and he'd heard the houses of 2 magistrates and the house of Lord Granville's agent had been torched, Granville being by far the largest mine owner in the area. Campbell remarked he'd been amazed when, on looking out of the train window, he'd first sighted the City of Tall Chimneys, as he poetically referred to Manchester, and couldn't find one with smoke issuing from it. "Has Fergus O'Connor arrived yet?" he asked. "Aye, he's holed up in some hotel evidently," James said. At that moment, right on cue, the 6-foot-plus bulk of O'Connor entered the tavern and came over to them. "We mustn't be seen all together here," he muttered. "It's not safe. We should use Schofield's place." With that he left, much to their amazement. "The man's running scared," Cooper remarked. "Shall we follow him?" James Leach suggested they have a chat first. "We'll meet him at Reverend Schofield's chapel soon enough." "Have you read his piece in the Northern Star?" McDowell asked. "What do you think he's playing at? Why is he arguing we shouldn't support the strike and that it's all an anti-Corn Law League plot?" James laughed. "The problem with old Fergus is, if he doesn't think of the idea first, he always reckons it can't be much good. Mind you, O'Connor's right in a way. In truth, it were an anti-Corn Law League plot. Thing is, you see, we kind of stole it off him. All the workers support the Charter, and they're all solid against the League. The question is, will O'Connor and his ilk have the guts to support us workers?" Although there was no way they could have known it, at that precise moment over 4,000 mill operatives meeting on Hunslet Moor above Halifax had voted to support the Charter, and plans were being made in Leeds for turnouts in all the mill villages surrounding the town. Plans were also underway in London for public meetings and demonstrations in support of the strike, with calls to make it a universal stoppage until the Charter was won. Cornish tin miners were also joining the fray. Nearer home, troops were readied. In Manchester, the town's leading borough magistrate, Daniel Maud Esquire, prepared to don a new hat, following consultations with a number of the leading Liberal manufacturers and Sir William Waugh.